Hey folks, and welcome to iWizard. So I just read a book. It is called Hyperion by Dan Simmons, and it's easily one of the best science fiction novels I have ever read. This is 6 Reasons to Read. Let's talk about it. All right, welcome back. Jordan here. So, Hyperion is book 1 of Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos series. It was published in 1989 and won the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 1990. And this is a book that's just been recommended to me so many times, I can barely even count. So, I decided to finally give it a go. We're going to get into how this book blew my mind, why it's so special. But first, let's do a little synopsis. In the valley of the time tombs, where huge brooding structures move backward through time, the Shrike waits for them all. There are those who worship the Shrike, those who fear it, and those who have vowed to destroy it. On the eve of Armageddon, with the entire galaxy at war, a group of 7 space pilgrims travel to the planet Hyperion, a planet beyond the laws of the hegemony of man, to seek answers to the unsolved riddles of their lives and make a request of the mysterious and deadly and possibly robotic creature who lives there. Inspired by Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, the story dives into the backstories of the pilgrims, exploring the desperate hopes and terrible secrets of each, and interweaving those stories into one overarching narrative. As it turns out, one of these pilgrims may hold the fate of humanity in his hands. Hyperion is a wonder and awe-provoking masterwork of science fiction, a tour de force brimming over with excitement and invention. All right, so just a brief synopsis there. Let's get into the list with number 1, the structure. Okay, so like I said, I was completely blown away by this book. I feel like the reviews I've watched just don't really do it justice. People do gush about this book, don't get me wrong, but I feel like of the reviews I've watched, people just kind of make it sound like this is Canterbury Tales in space. So I guess I assumed that it would be 7 people on a pilgrimage just kind of telling stories to one another, and that it would all be in this sort of round the campfire style of storytelling. But that's not actually how Simmons does it. Now, it's true that the frame narrative and the structure are essentially the same as Canterbury Tales, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that each pilgrim's story is more like its own lengthy vignette and is fully immersive, so that you tend to mostly forget about the frame while you're in each of the stories. In fact, early on, one of the characters explains that he's actually recording all of the tales and then rewriting them to get rid of the redundancies and the natural inconcision of speech. So each story is like its own self-contained novella. But then in between each one, we get the connective tissue. And by the end, we see each person was chosen to go on this voyage and how they've all kind of been chosen for a reason. And so in some ways, it is like Canterbury Tales in space, but it's also a little bit like the TV show Lost, where you learn more and more as you go along about what everyone has in common and why they have a common destiny. And it worked for me too, because I love fantasy literature, and you've got the classic archetype in here of the hunting group of companions that I have always loved in fantasy novels. And so yes, we've got our pilgrims. One of them's a baby, so there's 7 of them actually, but only 6 stories. And I'm telling you, every story in this book hits. Highly original, big ideas, compelling story arcs, fully fleshed out characters. And so that's going to take us to number 2, which is that this book has everything. Because this book is essentially 6 novellas spliced together, it enables the author to tell a bunch of distinct stories that each represent, I would say, different sci-fi subgenres. So you've got the Priest's Tale, which reads like the diary of some 18th century explorer, except they're exploring the jungles of this planet Hyperion to find this fabled civilization. And so it's got xenoarchaeology and this weird religious cult and moments of awe and religious horror. It's probably still my favorite of all of the stories. Then you get the Soldier's Tale, and suddenly Simmons is throwing us into this military academy, and we meet the Palestinian Colonel Fedman Kassad. And so there's definitely echoes here of Heinlein and Joe Haldeman. I would say it's a cross between military SF and a subgenre that I would call Star Wars, but there's an exhilarating romantic subplot in the story too, which is very cleverly done. I don't want to spoil too much, but I'll just say the main character falls in love with a woman that he meets inside of his virtual reality battle sim. And then when he gets out of it, he has no idea if she's real. And so he has to go on this quest to figure it out. And anyhow, then we're dropped into the next story, which is the Poet's Tale. And we get this, what would you call it? It's a meta-literary, soft sci-fi odyssey with a prophetic bent to it. It's fantastic, especially if you're someone like me who enjoys a bit of intellectual history, and if you're interested in pondering what the publishing world and the literary scene might look like in the deep future. Then there's the fourth tale, which is the Scholar's Tale. This was probably my second favorite story in the book, and this one's like, I don't know, it's like one of those old school sci-fi stories that examine like one big idea, right? And it really explores it. It's got this sort of ticking time bomb element to it as well, which makes it a page turner. It's about this Jewish professor who has, let's say, a very Benjamin Button sort of problem, which I'll get into later, that is just one of the most touching and human stories. And it's like, this story of a dad who's desperate to do right by his daughter. It's utterly compelling. And then again, the author switches gears and drops us into the next story, which is the Detective's Tale. And this one is like a Philip K. Dick style philosophical noir cyberpunk story with touches of Jasper Fforde. And it's such a fun story about this female private detective who takes on this cybrid client whose personality is modeled on John Keats, the Romantic poet. Cybrids, by the way, are like human bodies controlled by a technocore AI. And so the complicated thing is that they become lovers, and she has to protect him from these people who are trying to murder him. And they actually have to break or hack into the technocore. And so there's some really cool cyberpunk action, and this one is probably my third favorite story. And then the last one, the Consul's Tale, is really cool too, and this one is like, it's got the sort of Avatar theme going on with the colonizers, but it's also like World War II, sort of South Pacific. Young military man falls in love with one of the locals on a planet called Hawaii Covenant. And so there's a Romeo and Juliet star-crossed lovers vibe to it, but it also plays with time and aging and forbidden romance. So again, I bring all of this up just to point out how multifaceted this book is, and the fact that it's got something in it for everyone. And the exploration of sci-fi subgenres is done so well. It never once felt awkward or forced. I'd say a big part of that too is the setting. The story is set in 2732 under the hegemony of man, so it's intergalactic with hundreds of planets connected via these things called Farcaster portals. And so that enables the author to tell any number of stories on far-flung planets with different cultures and various levels of technologies. So, okay, that brings us to a related topic, and that is that this novel has some truly great themes and big science fictional ideas. So there's obviously the Shrike, the Lord of Pain, this simultaneously mysterious and legendary, indestructible creature of immense power and strength who guards the time tombs on Hyperion and who's portrayed as almost being godlike. And it's such a fascinating creation in a sci-fi novel where typically the bad guys in sci-fi novels are maybe they're weird looking, maybe they're silicon based, maybe they're like the inhibitors from Revelation Space or the primes from Hamilton's Commonwealth saga, but they're usually a race of creatures, not like a crazy looking lone metallic red-eyed final boss from a video game or some tomb guarding monster from a fantasy novel, but that's what the Shrike is. And nobody really understands the Shrike or even the Time Tombs for that matter. And those are really cool, by the way, too. It's this group of 6 mysterious structures in this remote valley on Hyperion that were constructed in the future and then sent traveling backward in time using anti-entropic fields or something like that. I'm not really sure actually how they work, but there's almost a Stargate-like quality to the whole thing, and it's really neat. But there's so many big ideas in here. There are the Templar tree ships, which, my goodness, just imagine like if the woodland elves from Lord of the Rings and the Na'vi from Avatar got together and built a spaceship. There's the whole cruciform infection thing in the Priest's Tale with the Bakura and the Tesla trees, which are so incredible. I just don't know how an author comes up with something like that. I mentioned the Soldier's Tale and how Kassad falls in love with this woman during his virtual reality battle sim training, and he's wondering if she's real. And what's cool about that is that this simulation program is part of the World Web All thing, which is this real-time network that governs hegemony politics and uses this framework created by 6,000 AIs. And the thing is that it's evolved a sort of autonomy and consciousness of its own. So there's really no telling what it's up to at any given moment or what the deal is with this woman he meets in the training program. At one point, Kassad, looking for answers, consults this AI expert. And the guy tells him, actually, quote, the HTN stuff doesn't simulate, it dreams. Dreams with the best historical accuracy in the web, way beyond the sum of its parts, because it plugs in holistic insight as well as facts. And when it dreams, it lets us dream with it. So that's such a cool plot line, but there are so many others. Simmons clearly has an interest in questions about time and time dilation, and you see in the last story where the two lovers are aging at different speeds, and that is such a touching story. And so there's a real fixation on questions of relativity and aging and how advanced technology will kind of change what it means to age without really fully getting rid of the problem of mortality. That's still there. So there's one character in the book who ages backwards, and there's this whole sort of exploration of that. Citizens have these anti-aging solutions, the Paulson treatments that wealthy people can get. You can kind of bring people back to life in some ways. You can do it in the literal sense, but also using cybrids. So one of the most interesting plot lines in here involves this attempt to resurrect the consciousness of the late Romantic poet John Keats by basically taking everything he wrote and everything we know about him and everything that people during his time said about him, and then creating this artificially intelligent personality that actually gets implanted into someone who's human. Well, he's human in most ways. Anyways, I could probably go on for hours about these big sci-fi ideas, but I want you to experience it for yourself. So up at number 4, we have the excellent characterization. And what I mean by that is the characters themselves are not only compelling, but they're also all really distinct. Their voices and personalities are different. You've got Father Lenar Hoyt, who's this very serious guy who's got a secret, and he's telling his story through the journals of this other priest, Paul Dure. And so there are meta layers and complexities to his story. Fedman Kassad, again, is this tough but smart and courageous guy who's kind of a revolutionary turned anti-war activist. So he's a deep and dynamic character. You've got probably the most interesting character in the book in Martin Silenus, who is this loquacious intellectual who is obsessed with language and the power of the written word, but he's also a cynical, world-weary drunk who is clearly broken in a lot of ways. There's a really great plot line in The Poet's Tale about what it might mean to lose one's ability to wield language. It really reminded me of a short story by Octavia Butler called Speech Sounds, but I definitely identified in a lot of ways with Martin Silenus, but I also very much identified with Saul Weintraub, the Jewish professor whose daughter, and I don't want to give too much away, but she has this rare condition tied to Hyperion and the Shrike and the Time Tombs that causes her to age backwards. And so as a father, this guy feels the need to save his daughter. And as a professor, he feels the need to find a solution and a cure. And there's an almost biblical dilemma straight out of the Old Testament, or even Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling there too. I also liked Braun Lamia. She's this sort of no bullshit private investigator on a mission. She is the only female pilgrim. Well, I should say she's the only female pilgrim who can tell her story. And then lastly, I would say that another effective wrench in all of this that Simmons throws into the story is that of the 6 adult pilgrims on the voyage, there's a suspicion that one of them might be a spy or a double agent. So that's another fun aspect of tension and drama in the story. So the 5th reason to read Hyperion, I'm going to say, is the fact that this book is prophetic and very scientifically accurate without necessarily being hard sci-fi. So because this book was published in 1989, I have to say that I was in no way prepared for how incredibly prophetic and advanced it was going to be scientifically, and also in terms of really quite accurately predicting developments in AI and culture and politics. I mean, Simmons' use of artificial intelligence, his knowledge of how it works, and its prominence in the story, I actually couldn't believe it. Artificial intelligence is completely and totally central to almost every aspect of this story. I mentioned the All thing. This is a real-time network that actually governs hegemony politics and, quote, feeds information to tens of billions of data-hungry hegemony citizens on more than 150 worlds, and that has basically evolved a consciousness of its own. The citizens actually tap into it via neural implants, and so at this point, the hegemony of man is partly governed by AI. Basically, the civilization operates on a bicameral form of government, and the All Thing acts as the lower house of that form of government, with the Senate being the upper house. And so it's this uneasy alliance that is meant to have checks and balances, with humans checking AI and AI checking humans. But one of the cooler plots or plot elements is that uneasy alliance is beginning to break down, and the AI have actually split off into different factions. And so what I find to be amazing is that while in 1989 this must have really seemed strange and kind of far-fetched, I actually think this is close to where we're heading if you consider recent developments in AI. I would say also, in terms of being prophetic, the Farcaster technology, which basically enables a person to travel somewhere else instantaneously using these portals. So I'm not saying we're anywhere near being able to do this kind of thing, but given how interconnected our planet is, given how advanced communication and shipping has become, there are definitely some parallels. In fact, in the story, people even use these portals in their houses. So if you're wealthy, you can actually buy a big house, and instead of doorways, you can install Farcaster portals so that the different rooms of your house are actually on different planets. And you pay a fee to keep this technology running. It's very expensive. So when Martin Silenus gets rich, he does this. He says, quote, "My home has 38 rooms on 36 worlds. No doors. The arched entrances are Farcaster portals, a few opaqued with privacy curtains, most open to observation and entry. Each room has windows everywhere, and at least 2 walls with portals. From the grand dining hall on Renaissance Vector," he says, "I can see the bronze skies and the verdigris towers of Keep and Abel in the valley below. below my volcanic peak. And by turning my head, I can look through the Farcaster portal and across the expanse of white carpet in the formal living area to see the Edgar Allan Sea crash against the spires of Point Prospero on Nevermore. My library looks out on the glaciers and green skies of Nordholm, while a walk of 10 paces allows me to descend a short stairway to my tower study, a comfortable open room encircled by polarized glass which offers a 360-degree view of the highest peaks of the Kushpat Karakoram, a mountain range 2,000 kilometers from the nearest settlement. And so you get the picture there. Another cool thing was the military training and how space soldiers use virtual reality to train for fighting on different worlds. And what's neat is they have these different modules that enable you to recreate historical battles. So the soldiers are training in Agincourt, in Vietnam, in Gettysburg, at the Battle of Borodino. Anyhow, again, I could go on all day with how prophetic this book is. The book predicts our modern day hyper online condition, our information overload, our outrage culture, our addiction to the internet. There's a heavy reliance on RNA technology and all this other stuff that I can't even really believe that a writer in the 1980s would have known to talk about. But that brings us to our final reason to read. Number 6. This is an intellectual book. There are so many real-world references. One intellectual influence that runs throughout the entire book is that of John Keats. Think of the title here, Hyperion. There are references to Shakespeare and music and Kierkegaard. There are discourses on the philosophy of education. This is from The Poet's Tale with Martin Silenus, and I'm going to quote, "Of his teacher, Balthasar, who lavished an inordinate amount of attention on memorizing verses from Ovid, Senesh, or Wu, he was an excellent tutor. We studied the ancients in the late classical period, took field trips to the ruins of Athens, Rome, London, and Hannibal, Missouri, and never once had a quiz or test. Don Balthazar expected me to learn everything by heart at first encounter, and I did not disappoint him. He convinced my mother that the pitfalls of progressive education were not for an old earth family, so I never knew the mind-stunting shortcuts of RNA medication, data sphere immersion, systemic flashback training, stylized encounter groups, higher-level thinking skills at the expense of facts, or pre-literate programming. As a result of these deprivations, I was able to recite all of Fitzgerald's translation of the Odyssey by the time I was 6, compose a sestina before I could dress myself, and think in spiral fugue verse before I ever interfaced with AI. Right? And so there are so many quotes and diatribes about how people don't read enough anymore, and just references to the Western canon and great literature. And so this book very much spoke to my soul in that way. Simmons is a kindred spirit for sure. That's going to be it for today. Please catch up with us on Facebook, Goodreads, Instagram. Tip your starving booktuber on Patreon. We would really appreciate that. And until next time, happy reading.